Well, here we are now in the computer science building at the University of Illinois, and I'm standing beside a glass case which has in it one of the world's first fast computers. This one, in fact, is a computer called the ELIAC 2. Just behind me is the ELIAC 1, and a bit further down, another glass case, is the ELIAC 3. But the reason why I'm standing past the ELIAC 2 is this was the first computer ever to be used as a basis for student learning, the first technology-mediated learning in the world. So here we have this computer, and you can see that it doesn't have any chips. It was all made of transistors, and some of the foundational technology was actually made right here at the University of Illinois. The transistor itself was invented by a professor here at the University of Illinois by the name of John Bardeen, who didn't just win one Nobel Prize. He won two Nobel Prizes in his career, one for inventing the transistor and a second one later on for discovering the principles of superconductivity. Anyhow, the reason why I'm here is I want to talk about the relationship of technology to education, and I want to say that, you know, in education we often feel as if we're technology users, not technology makers, that technology is sort of hand-me-down stuff that's been made for something else. We use Word, but Word was really made to write letters, and it wasn't made for kids in schools and learning, but we use it. We use Excel because it adds up columns, but it was really made for accountants. We now use Facebook, but it's really meant for, you know, talking with family and friends. We use Twitter, but it's a kind of a media device. We use all this stuff in education, and what we do is we try to sort of jerry-rig it, if you like, to make it work for our purposes. Well, I mean, I don't think we should really have that attitude, and I want to talk to you about the role that technology the other way around. I want to talk to you about the role that education had in making technology. So here we have the ELIAC 2, and look, I might say, just before I get into that, it's an iconic machine in a number of other ways. If people know 2001, the great iconic science fiction movie, Hal, who's the demon computer who wants to take over from humans, eventually he gets unplugged, and as he's dying, he says, "Take me back to Abana." So, you know, Abana, right here where we're standing, is the mythical place where this great computer, HAL, was actually created in 2001. Now, there's a certain sense of truth in that these were really foundational inventions which happened right here, be it the transistor or these computers. Now, when this was made, and the computer I'm standing beside, that little bit of circuitry there was made in 1962. So ELIAC 2, in fact, was built between 1956 and 1968, and that little piece of circuitry is from 1962. And there's a little book here on the design of a very high-speed computer. So this was the fastest computer in the world back then. Well, in 1960, a number of professors here and at the University of Illinois decided that they would try and build an educational technology, a learning system, and this thing was called Plato. Now, you know, legend is that it doesn't stand for anything. It's just simply an acronym, P-L-A-T-O, big in capital letters. People have tried to give it a kind of a set of think what the acronym might mean, programmed learning, something. I can't remember the rest, but anyhow, basically the consensus is that it means nothing. But anyhow, Plato is actually the first technology-mediated learning system. It's the first computer learning, it's the first e-learning, and it gets invented here. Now, what's interesting for this is this machine that we have behind us, for the very first time on this machine, because of Plato's requirements, there were multiple users on the same computer. In other words, a tutor and a student, or two students. So this was the first multi-user computer. But the other thing, which I think is even more profound, is in a real sense this was the first computer which had been required to carry language. So very early on they built a little television terminal so things could be seen, so building a visual interface. And also communication, messaging. And this became messaging services, bulletin boards, the first notes program, and of course, if you go back into the history of computing, the first email program was created here, a program called Eudora, which some people may remember. So this was the first time, by virtue of an educational requirement, that a computer carried human language in these ways, with a visual interface and also a keyboard where you could enter things. Before that, computers were essentially devices for calculation. They were devices where you put in all your punch cards and the answer was a number. They weren't devices for carrying human meaning, for carrying language. So for me, this is a kind of apocryphal story, and one where we as educators shouldn't accept for one moment that we are just going to take hand-me-down technologies. These technologies were invented in the first instance because of the kinds of human needs that come out of education. Education led, technology responded, and we need to put ourselves back into that position as educators now. Plato went through a number of iterations over the years. So beginning in 1960, Plato 1, Plato 2, Plato 3, we're now up to Plato, actually 4 I have behind me. But before I talk about 4, Plato 3 was the first time that a tutoring programming environment was built. So the first time people could actually program instructional sequences. Again, the first such e-learning system where this was possible. But then by the time we get to version 4 of Plato, which is 1972, a new set of demands come up. And these are educational demands to be quite honest. That's really what they are. They're fundamentally educational demands driving technology. And what I have beside me here is the world's first plasma screen over there. And by the way, I also have here a huge floppy disk, which is this size, in order to keep a record of the program and to all the things that memory storage systems do. So there we've got this plasma screen. And one of the things was trying to build a sophisticated visual interface system. So one of the things we need with these e-learning systems is visual interfaces where it's possible to see diagrams, to see text, and to see those things together. Now, one of the interesting phenomena of the digitization of text is this bringing together of language and image. And this is pretty well essential in educational context. Language alone isn't enough. We need to have images as well. And in fact, what was built into this was sort of scalable vectoring systems where it's possible to pull images up and down, but also to represent characters as images, letters as images, not whole characters, but the same thing that you use to represent a line or a square or a drawing or something visual is what you also use to draw the outline of a character. Now this is a really quite fundamental shift, and in 1973 a team of people from the Xerox, the quite famous Xerox research laboratories in Palo Alto, California, the PARC laboratories, P-A-R-C, they came here to the University of Illinois and were really impressed by what was being built here, by these technologies. So not only is this then the first plasma screen ever built, but the idea they got from that became all the stuff that they took back, which Apple then took and created into its visual interfaces in the Macintosh and primarily in the Macintosh, and then subsequently became Windows and a lot of things. I mean, there's a whole series of cycles of iteration and copying development that comes out of it. But conceptually, it began here with this particular device now. Now, another consequence as well is this machine was actually the first machine to be a gaming machine where people actually played games. So in those first years, the first flight simulator was built, the first version of Dungeons and Dragons was built, and this was the first multiple player gaming system. So it was here the students at the University of Illinois, the computer science people at the University of Illinois, who together built these things for the first time and played them. As much of the engagement here on campus, I gather from people who were here at that time, was around the playing of the games, the building of the games, as it was in the actual learning environments and tutoring environments. Well, what happened with Plato? Plato actually didn't finally get turned off until 2006, which is a pretty long history, 46 years. They attempted to commercialize it, but really it was knocked out by personal computing. Really by the mid-90s or whatever, it became not a viable thing and didn't keep up with the technologies that were emerging around personal computing at that time. But at its height, there were over 1,000 terminals in all different parts of the world, all linked to mainframes. So it was mainframe computing essentially. About 1,000 terminals in different parts of the world, in South Africa, in Australia, and as I say, all around the world, that were using this system. But as I say, the history of the system itself and what was produced is really less relevant than the general theme that I want to make, which is we as educators, we need to regard ourselves as people capable of leading technology in the way that education led these technologies. And we need to reinvent the world again. The hand-me-down tools we get from commercial uses, business uses, popular home uses of computing, they're not good enough. We really need to be building stuff which is dedicated to learning, dedicated to the kinds of relationships that happen in classrooms. And as we do that, we're going to have to invent things. They're not things that just where it's all available to us. There's another generation of technologies that are going to have to be invented just the way these were invented.